Welcome into Texans on Tap, episode 32. I'm Brandon Strange alongside Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. You can follow them on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975. Hey, if you love Houston sports and you want to support a Houston-based company and podcast, hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. It's the easiest way to support us while also sticking it to those coastal elite media groups. Hey, just for reference, Colin Cowherd has 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and he doesn't even know Tank Dell is out for the season. That's 100% true. So let's stick it to the man. Hit subscribe right now and get our content. And for those that have, hey, we appreciate it. Guys, as the band Europe once famously crooned, it's the final countdown. One last game for all the marbles. Win and you're in, control their destiny, yada, yada, yada. All those wonderful sports cliches we love. And the team that stands between the Texans and that fate and destiny is a familiar foe. A rivalry mired in misery, sometimes as recent as Week 2's ugly loss and as far back as, trigger warning, Rosencopter. But none of that matters come Saturday. For Saturday night's game, on paper, this looks to be advantage Texans, with the most obvious factor being the quarterback matchup. But India saved their season with Gardner Minshew under center and have done just enough offensively to hang in the playoff race. Houston's most glaring weakness, on the other hand, is its secondary, which means that a lot is riding on Houston's front four. How do you like Houston's chances to contain Indy's offense and flip the script from week 2?
Well, if we go back to week 2, which feels more than 3 months ago, it feels like 3 years ago from where the Texans were, right? Texans got blown out at Baltimore, basically blown out by the Colts. So I really don't know that there's anything we should really draw from week 2 other than a couple of factual things. Anthony Richardson gets knocked out, not his season-ending injury. That would come a couple of weeks later. But Minshew comes in and basically had his way with the Texans. 19 of 23, 171 yards, mistake-proof, a touchdown pass, no interceptions. Key element in that, 0 Texans sacks of Gardner Minshew in the game. The Texans' pass rush has been hell on wheels over the last 3 weeks. I think Minshew has a little bit of that mustachioed riverboat gambler in him. I think he's apt to make a mistake if the Texans can apply some pressure to him. Conversely, when the Texans' offensive line was in early season sieve mode and pass protection, the Colts sacked Stroud 6 times. So if that's even played to a draw, we sack your guy as much as you sack our guy. I think that overall cuts favorably where the Texans are concerned. Of course, we view it, and certainly Texans fans view it through a Texans prism. These teams are pretty analogous, right? DeMeco Ryans, what a marvelous first season here, but you're not playing with house money at this point. You're playing for a playoff spot. Ditto the Colts. DeMeco Ryans and the Texans don't win. DeMeco's not even coach of the division, much less coach of the year. The Colts were 4-12-1 last season. Shane Steichen comes in from the Eagles, loses his high first-round draft pick quarterback after just 4 games played. I think Darius, now Shaquille Leonard, was already toast, but he basically fails out on the team midway in the year. They don't have their superstar running back, Jonathan Taylor, over the first 2 months of the season because of his contract situation. And here the Colts are, 9-7, just like the Texans. Both teams taking advantage of Jacksonville coming back to both of them. And so winner takes it. So I feel like it's the Texans' game to win. But I feel like if I was in Indianapolis, I'd be saying the exact same thing about the Colts, whose season you can really map to the Texans in multiple ways.
Yeah, funny you say that, Charlie, because Vegas has been kind of back and forth on this. The game opened with the Colts as 1.5-point favorites. Now, most books, the Texans are a 1-point favorite. I think FanDuel has them at 1.5. So that's shifting around a little bit. I think the thing to avoid from the first matchup that you kind of brought up, Brandon, is the Colts scored 28 points in the first half. You can't have that happen in this game, or you're going to be in big trouble with C.J. Stroud taking sacks and trying to come back. So they got to avoid that. And then you also talked about the front four for the Texans on defense. All 4 of those guys, Will Anderson, Malik Collins, Jonathan Grenard, and Sheldon Rankins, did not participate in Tuesday's walkthrough. So that is something really to keep an eye on. I know Will Anderson played in a limited fashion last week. We'll see if these other guys can get back and get going. Sheldon Rankins had a good game last week, but you're going to need them, or you can't be playing with all backups on your defensive line there. So that'll be something to watch as the week progresses here. And it's a short week, so that's something to keep in mind too.
A fair fight, though, in terms of that matchup, Texans defensive front versus Colts offensive line. Who is healthy and hardy? And as you allude to, Josh, good to go, better to go on the short week turnaround. At least it's a Saturday night game as opposed to an early Saturday game. But the Colts' three best offensive linemen all dinged up. Center Ryan Kelly left the Raider game, came back. Former All-Pro guard Quentin Nelson also dealing with a bit of an ankle problem. And their right tackle, Braden Smith, very good player, just back from missing a month with a knee problem and apparently aggravated that a little bit. In a one-game do-or-die situation, I would expect all to answer the bell, the difference of pain versus injury. But yeah, the NFL war of attrition, and as recently as 2 years ago, there would be no Game 17. Fortunately for both of these teams, there is, and here they are. And who can go the longest over 60 minutes? And that football bromide number one, it all begins in the trenches, specifically when it's Colts ball against the Texans, who has the healthier, better bodies within the game. Conversely, the Texans have done some patchwork stuff. Charlie Heck playing every snap in a must-win game. If Fant is back, that does not happen this week. Colts have a pretty good defensive front. They have three different guys with at least 7 sacks. And mentioned way back in week 2, the Texans O-line got trucked by the Colts. So that obviously needs to be cleaned up.
And while we're talking about health, CJ had a good and, more importantly, uneventful return from concussion protocol on Sunday. D'Amico doesn't want a replay of what happened in week 2. So, with the sacks in regards to, how do you like Stroud's chances against Indy's defense this time around?
Well, the Texans were a lousy team in week 2. And not that the Colts were proven as a good team, but the following week, the Colts beat Baltimore way back in week 3, and we know where the Ravens are now. So, the Colts whacked the Texans. The following week, the Colts beat the Ravens. Well, the week before the Colts hammered the Texans were taken apart at Baltimore, which to me, we can all wad up and throw in the trash, right? The Texans then were lousy. Indy was off to a good start. Now they're dead even. I think the Colts' home field advantage actually is not a great one. That building can be pretty quiet. I think they were kind of lulled to sleep. Peyton Manning would always demand quiet when he had the ball. But when the other team has the ball, that doesn't strike me as one of the more raucous environments in the league. The Colts have won 3 in a row, but they've beaten the Steelers and the Raiders, and the third team in there is slipping me, but not anybody any good. So I don't think it's going to be some Arrowhead-like or Seattle 12th man. The crowd's going to be going crazy. And, the Texans are facing a 12th man in terms of noise. My concern, and I don't live and die with the results, is I feel pretty confident from a Texans fan standpoint. With the healthy Stroud, give me him over Minshew all day. Although QBR, Minshew has a better number than C.J. Stroud. Nico Collins needs to give him a healthy 60 minutes. Of course, who will be the number 2 wide receiver in terms of output in the game for the Texans? The Colts side, they don't really have any game breakers, but Michael Pittman's over 100 receptions. A rookie named Josh Downs has been coming on a little bit for them. But there's no fear of God guy. Unless Jonathan Taylor really rips off a big game offensively. He's coming off 21 carries, 96 carries against the Raiders, more of his typical workload after they kind of eased him in after joining midway in the season. But let me just cover special teams in brief. On paper, edge Texans. The kickers are both good. Matt Gay's a solid veteran for the Colts, but Fairbairn's been almost perfect. His only miss all season was in the Colts blowout loss. He missed a 51-yarder, which prevented the Texans from actually trying to pull that game out. They'd gotten within 31-20. Fairbairn kicks a field goal. You're within 8 with still 3 minutes to go, but he missed. Well, he hasn't missed since. Cameron Johnston, a field turner. They'll have that roof closed, so he'll be booming away. Field position can be really big in all games, but I think especially for the Texans defense, because I don't like Minshew's chances of leading multiple 75, 80-yard drives as he did in Houston. unless Jonathan Taylor goes off.
Yeah, for me, Brandon, you asked about protecting CJ Stroud. First glance, it looks like it could be an issue, right? With they're fifth in sacks, the Colts are on the season, which is a really good number. But if we look back, their last 2 games, they only had 1 against the Falcons. They only had 2 against the Raiders. So as of late, they haven't been sacking the quarterback at a high level. So hopefully that continues. As far as game breakers, I look back at, Devontae Adams. I know he's in a class of his own, but he had a huge game in that Raiders-Colts game. 13 catches, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I know Nico Collins isn't on that level, but it makes me think a big game could be coming from him this week. And then from the running backs, this is something that's been consistent. They gave up 7 catches to Bijan Robinson. They gave up, I believe, 6 catches to Raiders running backs. So I wonder if this is an opportunity for Devin Singletary to get going, because it seems like other teams have identified that as a weakness, throwing the ball to the running back against them. So maybe it's a big week for Motor.
Colts are 27th in points allowed. So it's certainly a defense that plenty of teams have gotten to this season. The Colts' point differential, they're negative. The Texans are plus 20. The Colts are something like minus 10 or 15, somewhere in that range. So, by those numbers, let me say, if it's a blowout, I think the Texans win. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, though.
Well, another evolution of this season has been Devin Singletary over Dameon Pierce. And so by yards allowed, I believe Indy has the 6th worst run defense. So hopefully the Texans can exploit that as a difference in the game, as you talked about, Josh. All right, guys, it's prediction time. Last week, both of you guys predicted kind of projected a much closer game than what we got. We got a blowout. What's your final score predictions for Texans Colts?
Texans 23, Colts 20.
I'll go Texans 24, Colts 21.
All righty. Well, hopefully we'll be talking about a win and previewing a playoff game, because that's going to be it for this episode of Texans on Tap. We will be back next week one way or the other. Again, hopefully we're previewing a playoff game. Fingers crossed. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year. Go Texans.